Hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. This is an installment in the Lloyd and Lloyd Parent Workshop series at University Heights Charter School. We got this idea from Miss Cooper, who watching the news like everyone has been seeing the reaction, and she's has been empathetic to how the students may be perceiving what's going on around them. All right, the reaction to the George Floyd event that we had to witness on camera, and the subsequent reactions across the country. So she suggested that we address it and try to help out. And we want to thank her for the idea and the opportunity, as well as Mrs. Lloyd for her consistent counsel to the students in the community and her contributions, as well as support in this presentation itself. I am Sean Lloyd, partner in Lloyd and Lloyd, and I'll be presenting the information here. It's called Protecting Our Perception. All right. Before we get into the data or the things that we'll be presenting here today, there will be a lot of pictures and artifacts, quotes from different educational materials. We're just going to put a little disclaimer here to make sure that it's understood that we are using this for education. Now, the objectives, right? We had mentioned perception and how important it is and how it guides and determines how we interact with reality. Those images on the TV or social media, wherever you may have witnessed it and or heard about it, what happened in Minneapolis, that affects our perception. It guides the way we interact with society and reality. So what we're going to do, or attempt to do, is offer some perspective so that we may help to adjust and heal our own perception. We will try to assist in healing the collective psyche, because we've been here many times before. We'll offer a brief timeline of who we were, who we became, and who we are now. We will also discuss this as a parenting opportunity for Black genius. Right? We'll get into that. We have sources and resources. A brief discussion on healing the collective psyche again, and then we will review 3 coping strategies. All right. What does it mean to heal the collective psyche? Now, the definition of the term itself, collective psyche, psyche comes from the Greek version of the word psyche, which means the soul, the mind, the spirit, or invisible animating entity which occupies the physical body. Right? Do we need healing, and what would healing look and feel like? Right, so physical trauma is one thing, but the mental and or spiritual trauma is something that is a little more complex, obviously, and something that needs to be worked on from youth. And we're going to define this term context, right? Context describes the circumstances that form the setting for an event, a statement or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So this is why we're going to take a bit of a historical approach and try to bring it to contemporary. Now, keep in mind, of course, that this is a brief presentation, relatively brief, and there's tons of information that can corroborate everything here and add on to it. But we'll give a brief timeline and to try to offer some perspective. Now we'll begin in ancient times, right? And the focus is on those that would identify with George Floyd, the Black community in the United States, right? and the diaspora around the world. Because if as anyone travels, you'll see that this this is not an isolated sort of condition. It's not isolated to the United States. Now let's just begin in Egypt, right? Now, the thing about watching what happened to George Floyd on television is that when children do not have the contextual understanding and the understanding of their own personal history, then that can injure the psyche, and then they will it will grab onto their subconscious as part of their reality, right? But we like to take them back in time to so that they understand that their their culture and their identity does not begin with subjugation. All right. These are this may not be new to many people, hopefully not, but these are statues and artifacts of from ancient Kemet, Tameri, Seti, Menehet II. This is Amenhotep, Zoser, Senusret, and this is King Tut's mummy here in the corner. By the way, Sheikh Anta Diop, Senegalese linguist, and as well as scientist, he did the melanin test on these mummies, and he proved without a shadow of a doubt that these were black people. This is the side of one of the temples in Egypt. It illustrates a Libyan, a Canaanite, a Syrian, and a Nubian after they had been conquered in the 18th dynasty. The 18th dynasty, which was the most prolific in terms of building. All right. This is from the tomb of Seti, Seti I, the ancestor of Ramses, who is given credit as one of the most prolific builders in the 18th dynasty. You can see the people. We're not going to spend too much time on these, but it's to offer a frame of reference. Right. This is from the so-called Middle East, is Mesopotamia. These are Persian soldiers. This can be seen in the Louvre in Paris. This panel here. This is Darius, one of the emperors and kings in Persia, and this is taken from the palace of Darius. This winged sphinx with the Darius' head. These are paintings from the 18th and 19th century of Arabs and what Arabs look like. And this is not the what would be a contemporary version of the so-called prototypical Arab, but just to know that we're everywhere and all over the planet, right? This is from, or these are from Southeast Asia, right? You have Angkor Wat, the Khmer Empire in Cambodia, and as well as Vietnam. And one thing that is very common in a lot of these artifacts is you'll see that the nose and the lips many times have been altered. And this happens all over the world, in Africa, Asia, Mexico, South America, North America, etc., Europe as well. Now this slide is an example of Etruscan artifacts. Etruria was the progenitor of ancient Roman civilization, right? These were the dads and the moms of ancient Rome. And it's pretty obvious who they are. But you also notice the nose here. This has been deformed because usually the nose is thinner at the top and it gets wider towards the bottom. You can see the way this is raked. They also are oftentimes deformed. Right? These are from Mesoamerica. These stone heads, so-called Olmec heads, and from the Shi or Tamawankan people. These heads weigh range from 7 to 40 tons apiece, and they are found in Mexico at sites like Tres Zapotes and La Venta. This gold pendant was found in Panama. Look at the face, it's obvious, right? These are Mayan people, right? Same Yucatan Peninsula up into Mexico. Even in Mexico City, where you have the Temple of the Sun and the Moon and the Teotihuacan complex there. These are what the people looked like in ancient Mexico, right? And I hope that any parents or children that are watching this or will get to see this will use this to prompt further research as well. They say the Mayans disappeared, but if you ask me, they didn't disappear. They just got dispersed and remixed, renamed. All right. Now let's go into the medieval time period. Now there's civilizations all over the world, right? That and during medieval times, but we're going to focus on Europe because our educational system classically does the same thing. It focuses on European history, but hopefully these images will give us a more accurate, self-affirming description and impression of who these people were that ruled the Holy Roman Empire. All right, now, this is King Ladislaw of Hungary, right? This is from a book called the Chronicon Pictum. It's one of those, back in those times, they used to make a lot of illustrated books. Sometimes they would call them books of hours. You had, and of course, only the wealthy could obtain them. Some people would sell hundreds and hundreds of acres of land just to obtain one of these books. Because as you could imagine, before printing presses, you had to pay, people had to take, they literally would take weeks and months and longer to draw these books out, to paint them out. On the right, we have the Hungarian king, it's not even Charles I, but this orb that he's holding is a symbol of the Holy Roman Empire. This represents the globe, and the cross here is the idea that Christianity is to spread across the globe, right? And you can look at these two individuals, right? You can get an idea of not only the progenitors of Christianity, which goes back to Coptic Christians in Egypt, in ancient Egypt. We didn't really get into that, but that's what it is. So Coptic Christianity up into the Holy Roman Empire, right? This is Charles V, King of France in the 14th century. This here is King of Hungary as well, Saint Stephen. He was canonized as a saint. Now he was the last Grand Prince of Hungary and the first king, but he had to take the throne. He actually fought with his own family, and he had defeated his uncle in the end to obtain the throne. He's holding this same orb, right? This is also from another, from the Book of Hours. This is the king of Hungary and Croatia, right? And as you can see also here that it has been defaced, right? Now, one thing that we like to share with students is that, this type of defacement, as unfortunate and purposeful and premeditated as it is, in a lot of ways, it is a sign of respect and an understanding of how powerful you are and what your potential is, and the desperation that certain people may take to try to erase that memory. But now, even although this was scraped out, all the knights and the bishops are black as well, right? Or original European. So now you can see him here in his forehead. Now, these two pictures on the left were taken from the Cathedral in Notre Dame in Paris. This is Jesus and his disciples. Now you can look at them. You can see that these are persons of a darker hue. Now, and please do not assume that time has had this effect, because if you notice the gold trim, this is still bright. it's still bright, right? This is the color that was intended for these carvings. This is a tapestry from Strasbourg in Germany. Some people call it Moors and the Wild Men, right? Now, if you pay attention to the castle itself, the people in the castle are Moors, right? The king and the queen here, and those that are attacking the castle, from their perspective, these wild men, they are attacking the castle itself. Right? And when people, I'm sure that the image that most people get when they think of a German is definitely not one of these images here of a Moor, right? But we'll also see later on that this was not just localized to the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th century. This goes on to much later times. This one is one of my favorites, and this is a painting in a museum in Lima, Peru. Now, one of the greatest revelations that we can witness from examining this painting is that, yes, this is the line of Incan emperors of the Incan Empire, right, in Peru. Now, if you go across from left to right, you'll see that they have on a similar dress: the scepter, the gold, the crown, the breastplate, the cloak, and you go across to the right, and then all of a sudden you get to this individual here, and he has a more of a European style regalia, right? He has his crown, but of course you can see here the cross or the crucifix and a scepter, but this is black. This is more European style, and he has the gold chain as well. This is Charles V, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. See, it's Carlos Quinto, right? That's Charles V, and he was the king of Spain as well as the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and helped to initiate Spain's conquest of the Americas. Right? Now, of course, when they teach about Charles V, this type of image is not going to be this is not the one that's promoted, and it's not the one that's going to be generally found in the textbooks. But it's important to know this, because a lot of our children, they grow up assuming and having the impression that their history begins with enslavement, right? And they feel that colonization from Europe was a thing that brought, quote unquote, civilization to the Americas. When in fact, in many ways, this was actually a family fight, right? When you look at Charles V, he did help to spur on the colonization of the Americas, but he looked just like the people that were already here. Right? And this is also found in that same museum. These are Incan noblemen. This is after they've been colonized. Now you can see the date. It's 1599. This, the dress that they're wearing, or the garbs, this is Spanish garb, but the jewelry is traditional Incan gold. Right? Well, and that's what happens when you get when you're colonized. You take on the custom of the colonizer. Right? Now we're going to move into a more contemporary conversation, and we're going to keep this focused on the United States. Right? And before we do that, we have to offer a bit of context, all right? Because we're going to get into a few statements, articles, and documentation that use particular terms that need to be defined, and particularly with the definitions of the time that were common during that time. I minored in Black Studies, and I remember when we used to go through some of those old texts, and up until now, people tried to say that swarthy meant, like George Clooney, right? But as you can see, Webster's Dictionary, 1828, swarthy means being of a dark hue or dusky complexion, tawny. Right? In warm climates, the complexion of men is universally swarthy or black. The Moors, Spaniards, and Italians are more swarthy than the French, Germans, and English. Right? Black as the swarthy African. And we're also going to define tawny, right? Because that was given as a sort of synonym, right? Of a yellowish dark color, like things tanned or persons who are sunburnt, as a tawny Moor or Spaniard, the tawny sons of Numidia, the tawny lion. All right. Okay, this is taken from an essay written by Benjamin Franklin in 1751, and it is his take on immigration and the influx of immigrants arriving from Europe. Right? Why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and, by herding together, establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? Well, I hope that last the last part of that statement is very telling, because the assumption in 2020 is that if you're coming from Germany, then you share the complexion of an Englishman. All right. He goes on to say, and if you're interested in some of the sources, there's bibliography at the bottom of the pages. We also have page numbers as well. And all of those other resources and pictures can be Googled. He continues, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny. Asia, chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. That's something for us to think about as well, because a lot of us have roots in this country, if not most. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes, the Swedish, are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet by clearing America of woods and people, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars and Venus, why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. And this, he is protesting the immigration of Germans into Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is famous for having a huge influx of German immigration, and some might call it integration. Immigration in the 17 and 1800s, and they have Germantown. That's where the Amish Mennonites came from, and we'll get into a bit of Abraham Lincoln in a minute. His ancestors, is said, came to Illinois by way of Kentucky, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Germany, perhaps, and those same Palatine Germans that Ben Franklin was speaking about. All right. So we, not only are we all over the world, we've been all over the planet for millennia, and not just participating in society, but guiding it and founding civilization. and quiet as it's kept, still doing that in many respects, technology, etc. All right. Now, as an educator for about I'd say about 16, 17 years, this is one of the I think one of the crimes that that I've witnessed in our own children's understanding of their history is that a lot of times they really believe that their history began in enslavement in the United States. Right? And it is our responsibility to correct that. And that does help to mitigate and understand the trauma of what happens when you witness something like what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis and why it happened. And to know that you are not powerless to remedy it. What man has done, man will do. What woman has done, woman will do again. All right? You have to know what is in you sometimes in order to be able to bring it out. Right? So we're going to adjust a bit of this slavery narrative, right? What is not generally discussed or promulgated is that, in fact, in the United States, a lot of the slaves were actually white, or what we consider white today. We're going to read a couple documented facts here. The enslavement of whites extended throughout the American colonies, and white slave labor was a crucial factor in the economic development of the colonies. Gradually, it developed into a fixed system, every bit as rigid and codified as Negro slavery was to become. In fact, Negro slavery was efficiently established in colonial America because black slaves were governed, organized, and controlled by the structures and organization that were first used to enslave and control whites. Black slaves were latecomers fitted into a system already developed. This is a typo. I apologize. That's supposed to be latecomers fit into a system already developed. All right. So basically, explicitly, what this is saying is that so-called indentured servitude that is sometimes alluded to in history textbooks, it was slavery, and the system that was used to exploit this sort of labor was already in place by the time they started to bring black slaves into it. White slavery was the historic base upon which Negro slavery was constructed. The important structures, labor ideologies, and social relations necessary for slavery already had been established within indentured servitude. White servitude in many ways came remarkably close to the ideal type of chattel slavery, which later became associated with the African experience. Right, and then here you have the documentation. If you want to look it up, please do so. The practice developed and tolerated in the kidnapping of whites laid the foundation for the kidnapping of Negroes. Eric Williams, Trinidad in the house. From Columbus to Castro. He also wrote a book called Capitalism and Slavery. All right, excellent book. He was the first prime minister of Trinidad. All right. The slavery narrative continued. The white servant, a semi-slave, was more important in the 17th century than even the Negro slave in respect to both numbers and economic significance. So as a means of forced labor, the numbers of slaves that were considered white, it was more prolific. All right. These are pictures that people like Frederick Douglass and others would use during the abolitionist movement in the 1800s. All right. As you can see, it says slave children from New Orleans. You can look at their phenotype, and I don't really have to say much. Just look at the pictures. That's the point. That's why we're using these. All right. You can always pause and go back to it as well. Now, Abraham Lincoln. I think this part of the presentation is very important because it illustrates sort of the idea of why we're taking this historical approach. Abraham Lincoln was, I know there are lots of rumors of what he looked like, but we can go by his own personal testimony to get an idea of what that was. And if you also read about his life, he had a very harsh life, right? This is why this book is entitled Self-Made Man. He had a very harsh life in Illinois, and he worked as he did manual labor from childhood to about 21, and his dad would collect about 10 to 30 cents a day to rent out his services. He didn't see a dime, so he was like an indentured servant himself. And he said this in out of his own mouth. Now you can also find this in this book here. There's another one after it that's documented as well. Please avail yourself of these resources to double check and also edify yourself further. This is taken from the book entitled Self-Made Man, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln. It's from page 4, the chapter Slave. This is his own personal testimony. If any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said I am in height 6 feet 4 inches nearly, lean in flesh, weighing on an average 180 pounds, dark complexion, with coarse black hair and gray eyes. No other marks or brands recollected. Now, he was, people know him generally to be a great orator and very witty with words. And some people also theorize that last part, no other marks or brands recollected, it parallels to a lot of the ads that people were using when they were auctioning slaves, right? Because they wanted to auction off an acceptable, pardon the phrase, product, and they would advertise these enslaved people as having no marks, right? I suppose you could imagine why that would be attractive, right? But dark complexion, let's not trick ourselves and mix words. And this is the power of perception when we have been inundated with certain images all our lives by a society that in many ways devalues. Now, we don't have to get into how many ways, but yes, in many ways devalues our presence. And this was shown very strikingly in what we had to witness on television, social media, etc. A lot of times we have cognitive dissonance, and when we see dark complexion, people try to trick themselves into thinking that doesn't mean dark. It is what it is, right? So let's not play games with this, right? Now this, we're going to define this. This is from Etymology Online. It's a great tool to look words up so that you can get the actual meaning of them, not the sanitized and meaning the way that it's been changed, particularly in the 20th century over time, to mean something else. Because what happens is when you take that ultra modern definition and apply it to books that you'll find written in the 18th, 17th, 16th, 1500s, it gives it a new meaning and context, one that is not intended by the original author, right? So sometimes we have to do our research and actually define the terms, right? So brunette, I think we all know what that means in 2020, but what it meant then was a woman dark in complexion, having a brownish tone to the skin and hair, right? It's from the French brunette. All right, brownish, brown hair, dark complexion, etc., 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 as well as you can see, Germanic, right? Brunals. And the reason why we define that is this, right? This is from another book by Abraham Lincoln, Life of Abraham Lincoln, being a biography of his life from his birth to his assassination, page 12 and 13. Thomas Lincoln, this is his father. Thomas Lincoln was about 5 feet 10 inches in height, weighed about 200 pounds, had dark brown eyes, dark skin, and black hair. He was always poor and indolent. Nancy Hanks, his mom, was a beautiful girl of pleasing manners and keen intellect. She was a brunette with dark hair, soft hazel eyes, and a high intellectual looking forehead, etc., etc. All right, so I don't, if you take his own personal testimony as well as a description of his parents, it's pretty obvious Abraham Lincoln was a man of color. Right? Now, why is that important? Right? Abraham Lincoln grew up in a time where racism was extremely prevalent, and obviously, when he was running for office, they used to make cartoons of him making fun of his Africanness, or what they would call, some people called him Melungeon, right? Which was a stock from that was a combination of Moorish blood and other peoples. Now, Abraham Lincoln, given his life, he had a life that was terrible in his youth, and he had rose to become the president of a country that was fighting itself, fighting, and yes, slavery was a huge issue during the Civil War, as well as corporations and international banking. He had started to print greenbacks, and that caused a whole lot of trouble as well. But some people would say, and I might tend to agree, that he was, when you keep it in context, he was the greatest president this country had ever seen, because he kept it together in those times, particularly with the type of vitriol that he had faced because of who he was. And you can look it up, the different cartoons, Abraham, Africanus, etc. Right? Now that brings us now more to a little remediation and how to approach these types of issues, and more importantly, prevent the type of trauma that can be that would be experienced by a child that has to witness something like that, or even discuss it. Right? And this is one reason why we began the presentation the way we did, is because when our children have a greater understanding, truly, right, of who their ancestors were, which naturally would lead to an understanding of their own purpose and what they are supposed to carry on, those types of things can be placed in the proper context. They know why those things are happening, and they know that they can respond in a manner that they can help to make sure that it doesn't happen anymore, particularly for their own children. Now, this is a book called "Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children." This is an awesome it's an awesome book, and it's a simple. It's not a complex read. I mean, I love it. Ms. Lloyd and I read this book in preparation for our own baby. Right? Written by Dr. Amos Wilson, a renowned psychologist. He was based in New York. I'll give you a quick bio. I have the book right here. Professor Amos Wilson is a former social caseworker, supervising probation officer, psychological counselor, training administrator in New York City Department of Juvenile Justice. He passed away in 1995. So, rest in peace. An assistant professor of psychology at the City University of New York at CUNY. Right, he attended New School for Social Research, Morehouse, Fordham, and where he got his PhD in general theoretical psychology. Now, one of the reasons why Amos Wilson is so awesome, and how he especially pertains to this and us, or those people of African or native descent, whatever you want to call it, we already shown that we're all over the world, is that his focus and his practice was to help our children heal, right? Because this David Floyd is nothing new, right? And unfortunately. But he realized how important the psyche, which we had defined earlier, was in being able to withstand and also correct those sort of traumas. Right? Now, in this book, he discussed the importance of the social environment and intelligence. And this is primarily focused as well on the home, right? And we should also realize, and this is something that he expounds on in the book, that we don't need to live in have a certain zip code for our child to feel that they are worthy. Right? I'll read his own words. Right? Infant and early childhood education and intellectual preparation need not require that the parent be formally or highly educated, or that he or she provide the infant child with highly structured, formalistic, didactic educational exercises and experiences. Didactic just meaning moral instruction, right? Expensive toys, elaborate equipment, inordinate amounts of time utilized developing learning instruments and arranging the child's learning environment are not necessary, right? Meaning you don't have to go buy that last video game that they right that costs $100 that they might be playing till 2-3 in the morning. They don't have to have the Jordans. They don't have to have all of these trinkets, and there doesn't have to be some super duper structuralized environment for them to build and renew the concepts of self-esteem and self-worth, right? Interpersonal games, parent attention, and creative, stimulating social interaction, right? Genuine love and sensitive care, a wholesome physical, social, and psychological home environment are the most potent stimulators of children's intellectual, personal, and social development. Right? Say that again. Parent attention, interpersonal games, creative, stimulating social interaction, genuine love and sensitive care, a wholesome physical, social, and psychological home environment are the most potent stimulators of children's intellectual, personal, and social development. All right? Just think about that. All right? Children, like adults, are all individuals. They're going to have their own personality. Now, you don't have to have a PhD from MIT or Harvard to raise a child that can go to MIT or Harvard. They have to be loved and nurtured and feel safe. And this is the first level of consciousness in terms of brain circuitry, the brain stem, fight or flight response, right? What is safe, what is not. That is paramount. They have to feel safe, number one. Then two, the component of teamwork and working with others, right? They work together with you in the home. They may be given some chores, responsibilities where they can contribute to the overall quality of life in the home. This will in turn, that second circuit, this will in turn, and that is the pons and within the brain. This will in turn stimulate the third circuit, and this would be the bird brain, right, or intellect, where logic takes over. So once they feel safe and they are able to be in an environment where they can work together, their intellect will be stimulated automatically, and they will go to discover for themselves. And then they can get to emotion, the fourth circuit, where they can manifest good and wholesome love, right? As well as the other emotions which are unavoidable, but with healthy development, they'll be able to navigate that, right? And I wanted to read a bit from another part of the chapter entitled Self-Concept and Self-Esteem. Social experience, that is, the nature and quality of social interactions the child has with other people, the groups to which he or she belongs, are some of the most important determinants of his or her personal identity. The child looks at reflections of him or herself cast by a social mirror. We can infer from this information that the type and quality of social experience provided by a child's caretakers is of crucial importance in how the child and adult will perceive and evaluate him or herself. Now, they say child and adult, meaning go from child to adult. So the type of cues and feedback that you give to the children, that helps them to form their self-image, of course. And I know some people may say these are obvious concepts, but a lot of times good information and truth is something that should be obvious. It shouldn't take 10-syllable words to explain the value of the concept. Pardon me. Now, thankfully, Miss Lloyd also provided us here with 3 coping strategies, right? One would be to facilitate discussions on what is going on and how they could use their voice, right? Now, how would you start? Sit somewhere comfortable and ask, how do you feel about what is happening? How can you do something about it? And how can we take action? Encourage your children to keep a journal, share their feelings, encourage them to research civil rights leaders and choose. Now, that exercise, you can see it right on the face that it helps them to validate themselves, right? When they are compelled to ask and answer these questions about what they can do and how they can do it, and then as well as keeping a journal so that they can see the patterns in their own thought process, they understand themselves more and more. And self-knowledge is one of the greatest forms of knowledge anyone could ever have. One can only have power over themselves, right? Another strategy would be to create intentional spaces for meditation, mindfulness, and fun. Identify a safe space within the home, a space you gather and have fun naturally. Be quiet together, listen to sounds of the ocean, or practice diaphragmatic breathing. Now, safe space, meaning in intentional spaces, it's helpful to develop a ritual, right? Or at least a place in the home that is respected, that as this being the place where we don't do that arguing, or we don't, which happens, of course, we don't throw things around. We don't, this place, this spot here, this little cubby, this nook, this room, this whatever is a safe space, right? And that type of meditation, when it's practiced, an individual, pardon me, a child or even adult, would naturally be able to go into that place when they're stressed, because they have trained themselves to be able to go within. Right? And involve children in goal setting in the goal setting process. This creates hope, inspiration, and realization that we can change things. When they have to picture the future, right? They have to be able to formulate in their minds, and that alchemy of taking something from the mind and bringing it to 3 dimensions, or the 3rd dimension, is it's a powerful thing. Right? It's self-actualization. Go to your safe space, close your eyes for 2 minutes. What would you be doing if you felt you could achieve anything you wanted? Get some drawing paper and start brainstorming ideas, goals, include social, spiritual, career, financial, academic, and physical. The whole person, holistic. Identify specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound SMART goals for the family. 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years. SMART goals meaning measurable, right? Measurable, attainable, and something that you can plan, right? Now, planning 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15 that is essential, right? Some people plan generations ahead, and that is how it should be. Now, if you have a generational plan, right, and you had to witness the aftermath of what we just saw, and the event itself, and as well as the aftermath, that trauma, which is definitely temporary, will not. It should not derail your own personal journey. All right. All right. In conclusion, all right. Now, so we've discussed so far the healing the collective, or helping to heal the collective psyche, a brief timeline of who we were, we became, who we are, the parenting opportunity for Black genius, healing the collective psyche, and 3 coping strategies. And this is it. Thank you. I'm Sean Lloyd. It's my email here. There's a website, robinsonlloydresiliency.com, and thank you for the opportunity. Everyone, enjoy.